So what is actually happening to the US economy? Because on one side, we have lousy unemployment numbers, so jobs numbers in the private sector, and right after we have fantastic, stellar numbers on job creation and unemployment rates. So let's dive deep into it, because did we actually abolish recessions, or are we heading into one? So, and what's the Fed going to do about it? So let's discuss in detail. So first off, let's start with the bad news. ADP, so payroll processing firm, just provided I mean, lousy numbers. So they had an expectation of private jobs creation of 100,000, but we actually lost 33,000. So it was way off, and this provided some bad news. But the market didn't really move. So that was interesting, because good news or bad news, actually bad news or good news, and good news are also good news for the markets, which completely disconnects to reality. But right after that, we had absolutely out of the park stellar US labor market data with a 147,000 jobs added, where the expectation, I believe, was 110,000, something like that, just in June. And the unemployment rate fell to 4.1. So we expected 4.3. So everything was absolutely fantastic. This starts triggering a lot of what's going to happen with the Fed now, right? What should we? Are they going to cut rates? There was a lot of pressure. So this is the interesting part that actually have a lot of influence into monetary mechanics, liquidity, and of course Bitcoin prices. But before we jump into that, every single video that I provide, I try to give you tools so that you can understand what's happening and how monetary mechanics actually work and how they influence investments. But for us to dive deeper and understand what's going on macroeconomically speaking, but also how monetary mechanics, on-chain analysis, and also macroeconomics can influence your investments, and so that you can actually act on them, we have our latest Bitcoin intelligence report, which is absolutely fantastic. So this is our June 30th release. So this is the latest on monetary policy and also treasury issuance, macroeconomic outlook with the great report. So the BI report number 18, and many more things that are happening right now. So if you want to have a look at that, just click on the link of the description below, and make sure to use the promo code as well for 5% off your subscription. All right. So let's dive back to our market outlook here. This is very interesting. So basically, as soon as we had the positive news, of course, everything just goes upwards. So S&P 500 to over 6,200 points, which is absolutely crazy. And of course, Bitcoin also follows. So you see here 109 at this point, 110. So it's a risk on event. Basically, the market just absorbed as stellar numbers, and it really shows how reality has nothing to do with financial markets. So even though when you dive deeper into those numbers, especially from the BLS, you're going to see maybe some problems like the one that Peter Schiff talks about. So if you really dive deep into the numbers, you're going to see that almost half the June jobs created were non-productive government jobs. And the 4.1 official employment rate is a joke. That's his opinion on that. But before 94, the BLS used a broader definition, more like today's 7.7 U6 rate, which better reflects reality. So in his opinion, the labor market is weak. Don't believe the hype, which is something pretty interesting, because this corroborates to the whole regime of the US actually being on a deficit spending spree that brought the United States to a higher GDP activity due to fiscal spending and not really the private sector activity. So this is actually a pretty good analysis when you think about it. However, it does not matter. If you're talking about financial markets, it's all about the headlines and the expectation of what's going to happen. However, it creates even more confusion if you're going to ask yourself, okay, what is the Fed actually going to do about it? And this is the most interesting part, because here, based on Truflation, you see that, look, unemployment is what the Fed is going to look for. So if that spikes, they're going to cut. So they were data dependent, and that's the data that we look at, right? So unemployment rate now goes to 4.1. So will the Fed actually postpone cuts, or are we going to have higher for longer? But again, at the same time, we have this whole plot, this whole movie, which is almost a meme or a Mexican novella going on, where you don't know what's going to happen, because we have more and more pressure from Trump to say, look, Jerome Powell, you need to be out. So you need to cut as soon as possible. We have no inflation. Everything is fine. But remember, we have the dual mandate from the Fed. On one side, we have the expectation that tariffs may be inflationary, and on the other side, we don't see any problems with unemployment rate, so it's not spiking. So we have absolutely no reason to cut. And again, it doesn't even work, right? Even if they cut, you're not going to be stimulating any markets, which is pretty crazy to think about when you understand monetary mechanics. So probably the high interest rates that we have right now are actually stimulating the economy even more, because it's more spending on interest rates. So it's a huge confusion. But again, for financial markets, all it matters is good numbers. Let's buy. It's risk on. Everything's going up. And this is also reflecting on what's happening with the Fed decision. So if you see the Cauchy, like the betting markets like Polymarket, but also Cauchy, which is in the United States, you can see here how this decision was actually interesting, because before the data, so just before today, we were talking about 77% of a probability that the Fed just keeps rates intact. But look at what happens after the decision. So after that announcement of the jobs numbers, it just spiked, and it's now at 95%. So literally the market, and it's a pretty deep market, because it's almost it's $107 million on this pool, so which is pretty interesting. So those markets are great ways for us to see how people who are actually putting some skin in the game think will happen. But of course, we have to wait and see. But the probabilities just increase that the Fed is not going to do anything. But what happens now to this whole tension, where we have constant attacks by William Poulter, and investigations that are going to be started on Congress against Jerome Powell. So the pressure just mounts. I'm not even sure if Powell is actually happy with that data, because they were data dependent. Now they have the data, and again, so this is just going to create more and more friction. But still, liquidity is up there. Spending is up there. There is nothing that really stops this train anytime soon. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next chapters of this movie. And but of course, if you really want to understand to have a deep dive into the data and how you can act on your investments, check the links on the description below for our latest BI report, because we put a lot of work into that, and I think you're going to love it. All right, see you in the next video.